St. Paul, Minnesota. Her teaching, research, and practice are aimed at ensuring that schools better support equity and well-being for students and educators alike. Her current work focuses on teacher experiences during the pandemic and the liminal space between the pandemic and the unpredictable future that we're all in, or don't know what's going to happen next. When I asked Laura what would be important for this introduction, she gave me a really interesting piece of information. She said, I'm a fourth generation public educator. Let that sink in for a minute. Her mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother all committed themselves to the craft of teaching. No wonder why you come by it so well. But I really admire that statement. I admire that she pointed out that over anything else, because I think it shows Laura's humility and her acknowledgement that we're really nothing without those who came before us. She's got a really strong sense of time and place and an ongoing commitment to a field that can be both powerful and dangerous to students. So tonight, Laura's going to facilitate a conversation about education, teaching, and struggle with local educational leaders. She'll introduce these leaders who are in it for the long run and have so much to teach us here at CIES. It's my great, great pleasure to introduce Professor Laura Wangsness Willemsen.
Thank you so much, Chris, for such a generous introduction. Hi, everyone, and hi to the folks online. Thanks for being here tonight. I'd like to begin by grounding tonight's panel in a sense of place by drawing on Monday evening's opening ceremony. On Monday, we heard a strong, clear call, something of an invocation, to stand at the edge of the forest. This land, these peoples, this work, this community, with attention, intention, respect, and indeed love. As we've been doing all week, I hope we carry this thread forward tonight. So we gather here at Bdote, Minnesota, the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers, the center of creation for Dakota peoples, and also sacred to Ojibwe peoples. And the educators next to me are all working with Minnesota communities on this sacred land. We acknowledge that this land was taken from Indigenous people by exploitation and violence. Exploitation and violence that is not merely in the past. And the stories you'll hear tonight include stories of struggle, of confronting ongoing injustices within, around, and even through Minnesota's public schools. These stories are in response to and against the backdrop of the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racism, as well as the subtler, creeping malaise of decades of neoliberal divestment from public education. We recognize our responsibility and privilege to work toward reconciliation. We repent of the injustices that continue to harm Indigenous communities, communities of color, Black communities, Minnesota's kids, families, and educators, and we commit to work for justice, peace, and the well-being of all peoples on the planet. And the educators on this stage tonight are living this commitment in particular and innovative ways, like the songs that we heard on Tuesday night with that incredible concert with V-Soda. Their stories are likely to weave together equal parts pain and hope. And like last night's gathering at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, which felt like a collective celebratory exhale after 2 years of being apart, I suspect you will hear joy tonight as well. So these stories highlight the improvisational and even effervescent ways that Minnesota educators have been attending to the ever-changing needs and challenges before them. They also reveal the weight of care, of the care work that they have necessarily taken up in this turbulent time. And importantly, they reveal these educators' commitments to, dispositions toward, and technologies of healing and hope for transformation in ourselves and in our schools. So by sharing these stories of hardship, healing, and hope in Minnesota's public schools, we hope that tonight's conversation becomes something of a benediction, a blessing before tomorrow's sending, and that our panelists sharing might connect with you and your stories of hardship, healing, and hope in whatever places and with whatever peoples you call home. And with that, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I am going to invite them to please share their names and your current professional roles and a word or a phrase that has guided your beliefs and actions as an educator over these past 2 difficult years.
All right, good evening, and good evening to the folks online. My name is Bryan Bass. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Achievement for Osseo Area Schools. For those of you who are not familiar with Minnesota, it is a northwest suburb of Minneapolis. The word or phrase that has guided my beliefs over the last 2 years, I think, would have to be humanity, the human in humanity, especially right here in Minnesota.
Good evening. My name is Paulis de Rangel. I am a bilingual reading interventionist at a southern Minneapolis suburb, inner ring suburb, teaching and instructing, working with students in Spanish and in English. And my word for these last couple of years would be empathy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sai Thao. I'm currently the school social worker at Carver Elementary, which is on the east side of St. Paul. I would say 2 words that I kind of live by this year, and we tend to joke about this first one, pivot. We hear this a lot, pivot this, pivot that, right? I hear that quite a bit. The other word that I practice is grace. We are in so many uncharted territory this year, this past couple of years, and we have to learn to give ourselves grace as well as our colleagues grace, because we are learning as we go, and we are just kind of like building the airplane as we fly it, right? So those are my 2 words to live by this year.
Good evening. My name is Kristine Scallon, and I'm an assistant principal with a new K-12 online program serving about 550 students in Rosemount, Apple Valley, and Eagan, which is a suburb of St. Paul. They're all suburbs of St. Paul. My phrase over the past few years has been take care. During the last couple of years, that phrase started showing up a lot in my email correspondence with teachers and with families. And I really liked it. And I started telling people to take care. And in fact, I noticed that many of us have seemed to communicate with an increased sense of compassion. And over the past few years, we've taken a little more time sometimes to check in with people, ask a personal question, or express a statement of gratitude. And that phrase, take care, is really a kind and open way of saying, take care of yourself, take care of others, I care about you, or I care so much, take it, take the care. So take care is my phrase. It's guided me and helped me slow down and helped me feel connected to people. And to all of you, I say, take care.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Justin Tiarks. I am the elementary school principal at St. Paul City School. We are a pre-K-12 charter school program, St. Paul, Minnesota. We're about just down the road from the state capitol. My word has been together. In the work that we do, and the challenges that we're facing, I don't know what's next. I don't know how to meet the needs of what next. All I know is that we're going to figure it out together. And so just kind of that sense of together, community. I don't have the answers. You don't have the answers, but I think we do. So together.
Thank you. Bryan, you've been traveling around your district lately. And I would love to hear what you've been seeing as you've gone and visited the schools and the educators in your area.
So I shared earlier, this is a northwest suburb of Minneapolis. So it's the 5th largest district in the state of Minnesota, a little over 20,000 students in our district, over half are students of color. We are an incredibly diverse community. We have the largest Liberian population outside of Monrovia in the world. And we have the second largest Asian community population in the state of Minnesota in our school district. So incredibly diverse school district. And during my transition, I've been out and visited many of our leaders, and I first have to remark that it's remarkable the resilience and the persistence that is within the educators that are on the front lines in our schools, working so hard to just sustain basic operations. Right, we've heard themes of a great resignation and a workforce shortage, and education has not been immune to that. We have many educators who are exiting and who are like, this is just too much. We've had leaders exit, this is just too much. And so we have leaders really working hard at making sure they can sustain the basic operations of day to day, with subs not reporting and going into classrooms, teachers losing their prep periods where they would normally be spending more time poring over data and understanding how to differentiate and personalize education even further for their children, but they're giving up that time to cover for positions that haven't been covered by subs. So there's been forced innovation. There has been change with the integration of technology to realize more of its potential, and that innovation sort of has been overshadowed by the emphasis of day-to-day operations for our leaders and their craving to first rest and heal. And healing is not going to be a singular moment, right? I was reading, I'm not sure which periodical or journal it was from, but that the pandemic, the residual of this experience for us as a society is perhaps 10 years. And so how do we prepare for like multi-year healing and to really understand what are the implications for educators to reimagine our schools for that kind of space? So there's some hardship here. There certainly are lights of joy and the resilience and the persistence and just the dedication and the selflessness that has been demonstrated, but definitely much different than when I started my career in 1997 in South Minneapolis. So thank you.
And Sai, you mentioned pivot, and Megan, your experience as a teacher exemplifies a little bit of what Bryan just said, and that you were called upon to pivot exceptionally. Can you tell us about your big pivot?
Yes, a lot of what Bryan is saying, I guess, is the life I'm living currently. So I was very excited at the beginning of this year because I was hired as a bilingual interventionist. So I was very excited for that role. I've been a first grade teacher for like 10 years. But a week, 2 weeks in, the third grade teacher quit, and with no notice. And so then I was told that I needed to go cover that classroom because there was no subs, and that the position was posted, and hopefully soon I would be back in my original role. But I am still a third grade teacher. The posting is still listed, and I am not going back to intervention this year. I've been told hopefully next year, so hope for that. But yes, it's been like you were both saying, a lot of pivoting with no notice. And then, I mean, it wasn't great for me. It wasn't fun to have to kind of give up my interventionist dream to go back, but it was really hard, I think, on the kids and on other teachers as well, just because as a teacher, a classroom teacher, I really depended on having that interventionist because our kids were kind of already a little bit behind, more than I'd like to admit. But without an interventionist, it is like, wow, I teach third grade, as I said, and I still have 9 out of 23 kids that are at a 1, which means not meeting expectations. And of those 9 students, 8 of them are children of color. So it's an equity issue. It's just difficult to watch as a educator. And I know all the other educators here and in my building feel exactly the same. It's hard to watch a student struggle and just not be able to differentiate for that degree of falling behind, I guess I could say. Also, so the gaps just keep widening. Basically, we see it and there's nothing we can really do because, like Bryan was saying, there's a lack of resources. We can't make somebody show up for an applicant pool. They're just not there. But we did, at the beginning of the year, we didn't have any intervention, not math, not reading, and not even gifted and talented, GT, because we had a teacher out, had a baby. And 2 months in, the teacher came back to her classroom. And so they said, okay, well, now we have to decide who stays in the 3rd grade classroom and what interventionist skills or what interventionist position are we going to open back up and provide for our scholars. And they decided that GT, they were more concerned about the GT parents. This was a direct quote from my principal, complaining than the blowback from not having reading intervention. So for me, as like I said, my phrase is empathy. I really like to think of equity through empathy, and to hear that just like breaks your heart. So it's just been really, it's been challenging to just watch the gap widen.
And I think we need to explain that GT is gifted and talented, and predominantly many students are white.
Yes, usually it's a little bit more of a majority white. In my class, at least, the students across grade level there behind are Black and brown boys more than anything. So, and we know that if you can't read on grade level by the end of 3rd grade, you're 4 times more likely to not graduate from high school. So the statistics are there, and it's just very disheartening. It's been hard on educators to handle that, knowing that students are so far behind.
Thank you, Megan. You talk about how that's been a struggle for educators. And I know, Sai, you've seen a lot of mental health struggles with educators too. Could you? And I just want to promise everybody that we are going to get to the healing and hope part here. So stay with us. We're going to wade through a little bit. Okay. Sai.
Yeah, so along with what Bryan and Megan have already talked about some of the hardship, as a social worker, I support students, staff, and parents, and I've seen a rise in support for our staff. I have never experienced so many teachers crying before. Teachers are stressed out. They had to balance their own life at home, their teaching, pivoting all the time. There's that word again, right? Pivoting all the time, going from online to in-person, back to online, back to in-person, right? So not just planning for in-person schooling, but they're doing double the work because they also had to plan online lesson as well. And teachers are stressed because, their typical strategies that they have worked for them for so many years are now overloaded, right? And an example of that is I have one particular educator. What she said is that by the time she gets home, she has nothing left in the tank for her husband and for her own kids, right? She's empty by the time she gets home. And she tried for a few months, but ultimately she had to go ahead and say, for my own mental health and to be able to continue to be a mother and a wife, I have to quit, right? So that's really tough because you kind of feel like, what more can I do to support my colleague, right? And that just leave you with the icky feeling. For lack of better words, right? I work in elementary, so icky kind of come to mind, right? And another example of that is, as a mental health practitioner, I typically support students who are dysregulated or have a hard time managing their emotions and how to help them get back into a regular state so that they continue their learning. Now, this year, I'm not just supporting students, but I'm getting called to support staff to provide them a space so they can get themselves ready so that they can go back into their classroom and finish teaching their lesson. Or I have to step in and teach for a little bit until they can get themselves ready so that they can come back and teach, right? That's really hard, right? It's really hard for them because teacher are very prideful on their profession. They take pride in the profession and they work hard at it and they're their expert. So for them to say, I need help, that speaks volume, right? Every colleagues I work with are professional. They have amazing work ethics and they come to work 100% all the time, right? So for me to see them admit that I need help, right? That's huge. Also, as a social worker, I'm also in charge of making sure that our students show up for school and their best self, right? So I'm also in charge of tracking attendance and truancy and things like that. And it's really a lot of uncharted territory that our school are dealing with this year because one example of it is I have three siblings. And once when we entered COVID, when we went to distance learning and COVID, they disappeared for 3 whole months. We couldn't find them. We called all the phone numbers we had on file, email all the emails that we had on file, nothing. Couldn't get a response from anybody, right? And 3 months later, we got a random call from grandma, supposedly, said that they're with grandma now and she would like to get them caught up on the schoolwork. However, they're in Chicago now, right? But we're still distance learning and she needs a device so that they can log on to the online classes. Now, this has never been done before. We don't have policy to support this. Is it still my responsibility? How am I going to get a device to Chicago to these 3 learners so that they can continue their education, right? And second of all, grandma is not listed under their contact. So I don't know where the legality is. Can I talk to grandma, right? So all of these things, we don't have policies in place to kind of support our learners, right? So that's another example and another hardship that has been placed upon school. Another thing is that we do so much more than just educate our students. And one of the things that COVID has kind of exposed or made more public is that when student comes to school, we don't just provide them academic, we provide them food, provide them shelter, we provide them mental health. We have nurses for medical health, right? So all those things, when we went distance and remote,
And I appreciated an immediate shift away from a scarcity mindset about these resources and instead a focus on advocacy around how and when and why these materials could be distributed to families. I spent several evenings with program staff outside in our parking lot, bringing iPads to families as they drove up in their cars. I got all my steps in on these days, not a problem at all. So throughout this school year, I've seen how online learning has been able to serve students who encounter serious barriers with in-person learning. Some of our students are medically fragile or have a parent at home who is sick with cancer. We have students in our program who have become parents this year. And we also support many students who struggle with anxiety and depression. In addition, Many of our students are serious athletes and musicians, so online instruction allows them to have time to train and practice. Yesterday, I spoke with a parent of one of our students, and she shared with me that they're living in their car. And during this time, while their son, who's in 4th grade, is with them, and they are trying to find more secure housing, he's still participating in school each day and connecting with his teacher every day over Zoom. So I've come to understand that online learning can provide a continuum of care and connection for students who might otherwise be isolated or marginalized. Our program has also been very intentional about creating a caring and connected school community. We have morning meeting every day. We have school-wide assemblies over Zoom. We have a mascot. We're called the Lynx, so you can kind of think that through. We have a school song and we have a yearbook. So I really learned to keep an open mind about the potential for online learning and the ways that it can really support our students.
Thank you, Chris. And Justin, you've also led your school through a lot of changes, including through some very turbulent times this past 2 years, and you found some new ways forward. Can you share some of those, maybe starting back with 2020?
Yeah. You know, I will never forget March 13th, 2020. We had just gotten first case of COVID in Minnesota at the beginning of the week. And, you know, you started to hear about it spreading. We planned, we were starting to hear from our staff. That Friday, the leadership team, we just kind of canceled all of our plans and we're like, all right, well, this is becoming a thing. How are we going to keep everybody safe on Monday? So we spent the whole day. We put together a note to send home to families. It was just one of the biggest, most hectic days I've ever had. And then the very next day, the governor canceled school, right? And all those plans went out the window. And that's not the first time all of those efforts of plans have gone out the window. But we pivoted, my friend Sai, and we adjusted and we adapted, and we didn't have computers for everybody, but we figured out how to get them out, you know, all the ones that we could. And we're figuring out how to distribute food to families. And we're kind of making our way. We're exhausted, we're tired. And then the murder of George Floyd happened, right? And we couldn't come together in person every day and hold each other through the grief and hold each other through the anger. And that was a really tremendously hard season. It felt hopeless. My school is right by the state capitol. My school is a half a mile away from where the protests take place. And our stores were shuttered and the public transportation was discontinued in the midst of all of that. And so I have this vivid memory of sitting in my basement while the other members of my family team sat in their basement. And we Zoomed for an entire day when we still didn't know what Zoom was, right? And we tried to figure out, what do we do? Like, it felt so helpless. And so we decided what we wanted to do is we mapped out the addresses of every one of our kids and families in St. Paul. And those kids and families in the neighborhood around the protest, we figured out what that list was, and we just divided and conquered. We called every single family. What do you need? Do you need food? Do you need us to drive you something? Because there was no way to access that, right? And that was a moment where we felt helpless, but we found something concrete that we could do. And on top of dealing with the tremendous fear of the pandemic that is a shared experience, I was just so mindful of just that deeper level of trauma and fear and frustration that was being placed on the backs of my students and families and staff of color that I, as a white male, have never had to experience. I think even a year later with the Derek Chauvin trial, we had National Guard troops all over the place in our area, and I drove by them several mornings in a row. And so did my staff of color. They drove by them several mornings in a row. And it was scary, but I know that as a white man, when push comes to shove, those National Guard troops would have my back. That was not the experience of driving by those soldiers for my staff of color. And so to even get to school on those days, you had to get re-traumatized, right? And that was brutal. And so I think about, and it's kind of been a burden on my heart this year, is how do we bring hope and perspective and healing to our kids when our adults don't feel hope and our adults don't have perspective and our adults need to feel that sense of healing too. And so that's really been a grapple space for us. What does that look like? One of the things that we started to think about this last fall, in the midst of all the things my colleagues up here were talking about, the bus driver shortage and, 15-20% of your staff out, and how do you sub? And just the stress that just never seems to quit. There were two kind of fundamental questions that emerged. One of them was, what is it that kids actually need in a year like this? Yes, they're behind. The pandemic has seen to that. It's going to take a long time to get caught up. There are some more fundamental needs that we need to meet. What is it the kids actually need in a year like this? And alongside of that, what is it that educators actually need in a year like this? And so we started to really think about that. And one of the things that we did is we kind of introduced this idea we call the winter to remember, right? And what we did is we identified $500 for every single classroom that they could spend however they wanted to. And then we gave a tremendous amount of flexibility and autonomy to teachers to redesign their schedule for a month, however they wanted to do that, right? We have our standard, 70 minutes of reading and 60 minutes of math. All that was suspended for a month. If you want to do 4 recesses a day, if you want to go on field trips, if you want to do art and music, what is it that your kids need right now? Do it. If you don't know how to do it, let's work together and let's figure that out. Because I think, to me, one of the fundamental things that we have to figure out in this season is how do we help this workforce of educators who is empty to get filled again, right? How do we help educators to re-fall in love with this work and remember that coming to school each day with kids is a gift, and it's so hard, but it's still a beautiful thing. And so how can we really respect the voice of our teachers, the ideas of our teachers, give them the resources, give them the imperative to re-fall in love with the work? And so that's one of the things that we've started to think through. And, it's not been perfect. There was a class that wanted to do a field trip, and, of course, plan the field trip, everything's good. We've got our volunteers coming in, and the bus doesn't show up. And 90 minutes later, they missed half their field trip. And it was just so apropos to this season, but we're keeping trying, right? We're keeping trying. And that's a fundamental thing that we have to keep pushing towards. So.
Thank you, Justin. You're talking about finding joy again. And Sai, you had a story about recently seeing some sadness, and you said, I need to infuse joy. Do you want to just tell us about that?
Yeah. So if I have one of my colleagues here, and she knows, Mr. Thao loves fun, right? And I think education should be fun, and it is fun still, but we forgot about it, right? So one example of trying to do fun again is the student earned a movie time during lunch, right? So I put on Encanto. Anybody know Encanto? Everybody knows, right? So as their time was coming to an end, and I was getting ready to turn off the movie, the teacher came in and said, no, this is the best part. So I was like, okay, as long as you're okay with that, Mr. Thao, he'll sing. And so we let the movie kept playing, and then everybody just started singing the song. And so I grabbed the wireless mic in the cafeteria, and I walked around, and I just randomly placed it in a kid's mouth, and we had our impromptu sing along to Encanto, and it was amazing, right? And we forget that education is fun. It should be fun. Learning is fun. Going back to what Justin was saying, we have to fall in love with education again. There's a reason why we went into this profession, right? It's because we love kids and we love learning, right? So trying to add a little bit more fun back into it.
Thank you, Sai. And I like how you're always attending to the well-being of educators, and that educators need fun too. And Megan, you talk about educators need fun, and they also need, you've become kind of an advocate for educator well-being. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think there are some pluses that have come from all these challenges, some hope, as you're saying, from the hardships. As Brian was saying, we've realized more than any time, I think, how important and crucial schools are and the role that schools play in our society, that we provide food and mental health and nurses and healthcare and just so much more than just academics. So much more. So it's crucial. We need our schools and we need our educators and our principals, superintendents. And I think knowing that and kind of having that like reaffirmed to us as educators has been powerful, in that we can start to maybe draw more healthy boundaries than we used to. I've seen a lot more educators lift their voice up and advocate not only for themselves and their mental health, as I was saying, but also for their students, where I might not have said something before. I've taken my issue of not having intervention to the principal multiple times. And as you were also saying about SEL, like it's so much more than academics. Social emotional learning is crucial after students have been out of school buildings for 2 years. So we feel a little bit more comfortable maybe saying, you know what, today we're not going to teach about fractions. We need to take a lesson to talk about collaboration and empathy and sharing. And I'm also an elementary teacher, so, but, but I think it's given us a little bit more voice and drawing some healthy boundaries and advocating for ourselves and also for our students. I wish we would have had some time just to do whatever we wanted for a couple of months, as Justin said. But even though it wasn't really prescribed to us, we've kind of taken it as well, just saying, you know what, this is what our kids need. This is what everyone needs, where before I don't think that would have happened.
Sounds like you're finding some agency out of all this, a silver lining. And Chris, you also, to build on what Megan said, have also found new insight and hope and healing in your profession. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. I will say over the past few years as an educator, I've really experienced all the things: exhaustion, worry, confusion. I felt resentment, frustration. And the hardest thing for me has been worry about safety and well-being of students. I think we all can relate to that story Sai shared about these students. We just don't know where they are. We don't know if they're okay. And we feel like we can't get to them. And so, you know, even last night, I was thinking about that student that's in their car with their family as I was unloading the dishwasher, and it's impossible to turn that off. And so for me, the challenges I've faced during the last few years have really reintroduced me to a deep feeling of dedication to my profession and to students and families, to teachers, and the well-being of my community. During the height of the pandemic, my uncle, who's an Air Force veteran, called me and he thanked me for my service. And it meant so much to me to hear that and to be reminded that being an educator is indeed a really important form of service. It's essential and it is appreciated. One of my favorite things about being a school administrator is bus duty. I love the sight of a big yellow school bus. And during the pandemic, I would be outside every day as students arrived wearing a mask or 2 masks, sometimes a mask and a shield. And even in below zero weather, I would always wave at the bus drivers and they waved back. And we kind of had a thing going with that. And some days they would stop and talk, you know, they would open their door and talk to me and ask me, you know, how are you doing? How's it going inside school? Are the kids staying healthy? Or we would talk about kids on their routes, you know, this kid forgot his backpack again, or, you know, this student, he really doesn't want to sit by his sister anymore. We need to change the seats. Or I've got this amazing bus patrol. Do you know how amazing this kid is? And these greetings and conversations, they really lifted my spirits, especially on difficult days. And they helped me remember that education is really a system of really interconnected people, all with the intention to do good work, to make a difference. And we're just not alone in this. We are stronger together.
Thank you, Chris. I love the image of the buses rolling up. Justin, to you, we know you're working to reinvent schooling with the Winter to Remember. And we've heard lots of ways that people are reinventing schooling. Could you talk a little bit more about your approach to this and what you're doing in your building?
Yeah, so, I think I want to go back again to those early days of the pandemic. And there was just so much fear. There was so much uncertainty and what's coming next. And, you're scared of going grocery shopping, right? Like I will confess, I was the guy that waited outside of Target 20 minutes before it opened. Like I had a couple other buddies, the masks on, because we just didn't know, right? And it was scary in those early days. But then in the midst of those first few months of fear, I also remember feeling this kind of renewed sense of idealism and opportunity, right? When else ever is this big, massive machine of education ever going to slow down like this ever again, right? It's not happened before. And, at the time, hopefully it was never going to happen again, right? And it kind of represented this opportunity for us to take a critical look at why is it that we do things the way that we do? And can we finally leave some things in the past and move forward and innovate and think about this work differently and do things, differently and better. And I think much to my frustration, we didn't take advantage of that opportunity, right? The goal was we got to get back to doing things, as quickly as possible. And we didn't take the time to learn the lessons and make the changes that we need to. And, and so I think 2 years later, the machine is moving again. We're stressing the machine of education. And I think we as educators have to take the time to, really let our voices be heard in this season. I think it's really important. There's opportunity to change for the better. And yet we look at all this legislation that's starting to emerge that is so regressive. Cameras in classrooms and banning books and anti-trans laws that don't let us walk alongside kids the way they need to be walked alongside of, right? And it's happening in these legislative bodies. And I think we as educators have an opportunity and an imperative right now to speak loudly together about what we know to be true, And so I think when I think about hope and healing, I think now is really a key time for innovation, and one of the innovations that I think is so important is just really around the work of trauma-informed education. It's really around the work of community-based schooling. We provide resources to families in every possible way anyways. The social contract with schools has changed, whether we've said it out loud or not. So it's now time to start funding this type of work, this full service wraparound. I think about the work of being a trauma-informed school. And part of that work is what can we do to take 10% of the stress off of the shoulders of families, right? Families want to do good, but it's hard, right? And they need partners. And what can we as schools do to be those creative partners to families so that they don't quite feel so alone? We serve our kids by serving our families. So I think we're in that season now of possibility. And if we don't claim that now, right, there's going to be a lot of other laws that get passed and pushed through. And now is that time to reclaim innovation and, the change that we want to see happen, because I think we know it, right? We just have to speak with one voice. So.
Thank you, Justin. Bryan, I'm going to ask you to bring it home for us. All right. What do we need to be doing now to ensure that the ways that we're reimagining education are more equitable, inclusive, and just, and that they become our actual reality here in Minnesota?
Well, I don't know how I follow Justin on that last expression. I think the social contract has changed, right? Like that really resonates. And I think about our trajectory of individuality as a country, and how there are aspects of that are honorable and important and critical to the vitality of our our greater good, if you will. And there's this tension around understanding that we're stronger together, that there's a collective that I am because we are connected, we are relatives, right? Our indigenous ancestors before us spoke to, like, we are relatives. And I don't know that it feels like we all see each other that way in a society that's become very polarizing. And humanity for me, is that word for me, I find myself just even triggered slightly being up here, right? And listening to the perspectives and the stories and thinking about my lived experiences through George Floyd, right? And going to the memorial for the first time and couldn't stand. I could not stand when I saw the outline of his body. So I think the reimagining part is to reimagine how a school can facilitate and foster healing for everyone who's a part of that experience, our families, our teachers, our young people, and to like get at what is essential for our young people in this moment. Like, what is essential, and how do we help our young people navigate coming out of this? And we're seeing an uptick in violence in our country. The New York Times just published where we're seeing some of the highest spikes in gun violence, like since the 1990s. And we're seeing some of that hit our doorsteps at schools, and how kids are resolving conflict or not resolving conflict. So I'm sort of all over in this, but I think what I'm getting at here is that I think the context matters. And the context is telling us that we have to help and foster this healing that the social contract piece, Justin, that you're speaking about, like that has to be high priority benchmark. Like that has to be a high priority set of standards for us. Social and emotional learning curriculum can't be optional. It can't be, let's get to that at the end of the day, or let's get to that at the end of the week on Friday. Like, we need to start that way. And it needs to spiral and be integrated throughout our day and throughout our experience. So I think that is a part of it. I also feel like the way we've always done things has got us to this moment. And in this moment, we're struggling, and we're not seeing educators in programs in this state, right? We're not seeing undergraduates flock to education majors. We're not seeing that anymore. And so if this vocation is going to be attractive and valuable, we have to be able to reimagine what is the magic and how our passion is poured into this space to inspire hope and not just maintain what we've always done. And so there's this incredible moment to think again. I recently read Adam Grant's book, Think Again, and it blew my mind about this opportunity for us to be bold in our questions, to be bold in how we reimagine, and to let go of and detach the present from the past, right? And allow this emergence of a new cycle and a new emergence to happen. So I don't know that I necessarily would say, well, researcher so-and-so and so-and-so has said this is what we need right now. But I think if you're in this space, you can't argue with healing being at the center, right? Like it's hard to argue with that when you're observing what's happening in our schools. So that's what I got. That's what I have for you in this moment, Laura.
Thank you so much, Bryan. Let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Wow. Dr. Acacia Nikwe a dear friend and colleague, has offered to walk around with a mic and take, if anybody has any questions, just a little bit of time.
Thank you again. I'm not sure I have the military background to salute you, but I think you're all heroes and heroines, and just like in the medical profession. So thank you for all you did before the pandemic and all you did during and will continue to do. I'm Mark Ginsberg. I'm affiliated with the University of Maryland. But for a period of time, I was working in international development projects, including working with a Liberia teacher training program in Liberia between 2011 and 2016. Those of you who remember a little bit about Ebola will recognize that I was working in a context where Ebola ravaged the population, led to school closures, etc. And I think we can learn a little bit from the other experiences, including the experiences in this country in 1918 when the Spanish flu caused. But I want to ask Bryan whether any of the members of your community who are Liberian were either teachers during that period or have relatives. Has that come into the conversation at all? It's such a potentially rich experience that don't necessarily have the lessons for what you should be doing, but it suggests that there's a an international connection that community might bring. So that's my question. I don't know if it has happened either because of the educators or because of the community members.
Thank you for that question, Mike. So I think to answer your question directly, not in a formal way. And at the same time, we are launching our first ever Global Summer Institute in our district that is focused around making visible the culture, traditions, and experiences of a Liberian population in our school district. And I think out of that will come an emergence of wisdom. And I think that's the piece that I most am noticing in my onboarding and transition into this role. This is my first year in this role. And I work closely with the Department of Educational Equity that has an American Indian education program that is a component of our department. And I continue to be amazed at when folks are able to show up authentically and to share the brilliance and the wisdom of their culture and those traditions, how it expands and stretches all of our imagination and experience. So I really appreciate the question. Thank you.
Megan, I think this question is probably for you. Excuse me while I turn around my computer. You get to look at me right now. So this is from Kristine Cabrera, who's one of our EDD students. Assessments can often be deeply entangled with a history of violence, dehumanization, and erasure of the details of human life. Are there ways in which your level 1 students are exceeding expectations as human beings? I agree that social emotional learning is important, and it's certainly the world I want my grandchildren to thrive in.
Yes, I think, and it's so beautiful. Like, I think with COVID, everybody just appreciates so much more being back in person and being able to share and just our lived experiences. So that's been amazing, just getting to talk face to face with kids about their struggles. And I think students are really good advocates now for themselves as well, where I have lots of scholars that have no problem telling me, like, I'm struggling with this at home, or this is happening. I don't feel comfortable when this happens. And it's just so, I think it's so strong of them to be able to really advocate for their feelings. And also just a lot more clear communication. I know the students I have right now, I had them in first grade and then I had them again, third grade. And last year they rotated through 3 different second grade teachers. And when I took over the classroom this year, they were like, this isn't fair. And I was like, you're so right. It isn't fair. Like, I think they didn't expect me to say that, but I'm like, it's not fair and it's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's just things that happen and it's not fair. I'm so sorry this is happening to you. But I've just seen a lot more empathy and a lot less like clicks, I guess you could say, a lot less bullying, a lot more. I have some really amazing little mini feminists in my classroom that I'm so proud of. They were willing to give some of the boys a lesson on why Women History Month exists. And it's just been so special. Maybe it's because I also like 3rd grade, because I'm like, wow, you guys are like little mini adults. It's so amazing. But no, I really appreciate my class, especially this year, is very aware of I guess, marginalized communities, minorities, and then their own privilege. It's been very interesting for us to have that talk about how many people in this room could have voted. Oh, one of you, like 50 years ago, one student. So it's been very eye-opening to have us all talk and really acknowledge it, but not playing like a blame game. It's not about that, about how we can all come together and really work together to help all of us, all of humanity.
Hi, thank you so much for all of the comments and what you've shared with us tonight so far. I wanted to get your opinion on how you see the role of creativity. When you talk about, I was very struck by what you shared about A Winter to Remember and the Let's Go and Do This. But I was wondering what you think about teachers having more capacity to act creatively, to be given the room to respond creatively, and how being able to do that, could it be a source of healing for teachers, for students, because we know how teachers are so constrained by state standards and tests and all of those sorts of things. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll share a couple thoughts. So I think that creativity takes time, and we have been so good for so long at putting this tremendous amount of time expectation on the back of teachers, of all the things that have to get accomplished, and you're a day off on your scope and sequence, and like there's that pressure that exists. And when we don't take the lid off of the pressure cooker, we're not going to get to that place of creativity, and coming up with new and better ideas and having that space to try to reimagine, because we're so focused on, keeping up, So I think a big part of fostering innovation and creativity inside of our teachers is by giving them some permission to be creative, giving them some opportunity around how they use their time, and trusting them as professionals. So I think that's a key part of the work of creativity. I think then in terms of opportunities for kids to be creative, I think that's absolutely something that they need. For how long have they sat behind a computer screen and had to be alone? Let's give opportunities to collaborate and be creative together, and give kids a voice in the things that they learn and the tasks that they do and the way that they spend their time. And so I guess those would just be my 2 first thoughts. We can't get so, we have to keep perspective. It's going to take a long time to get caught up, and it's got to be about first things first. Like it has to be, and we have to fight for that. We have to give permission to teach kids how to do school again and how to work together again. And that's a worthwhile investment in our time. How to play together, how to have fun together. That's a worthwhile investment in our time. It's going to come back to us in spades. So I think just, what do those expectations look like, and giving some freedom to exist in the midst of that is a key part of fostering that creativity.
I'm kind of going off of what you were saying to Justin, and what I was saying earlier about teachers more advocating for themselves or their students. I think we feel more comfortable taking some of those I don't want to say risk because it's not technically a risk, you know, but just kind of using our own judgment on some things and not having to feel like I've got to get the principal's okay to go do this. Like we had MCAs this week at my school. It's our Minnesota state standardized tests. And it's third grade. So it's the first year they take these tests in my building. And I was like, that's every day of the NCAs, we're going to have a fun breakfast. We had a sign up sheet. We brought in donuts one day, or a cereal bar one day, or a yogurt bar. And in the past, I would have went and asked my principal, is it okay if I do this? And I just did it this year and nobody says anything. It was something exciting. The families look forward to it. The kids were so excited. And it kind of made what's usually stressful, and it still is stressful, a little bit more fun. And also going back to the question here, tying these in, I thought of another thing too, that with MCAs, with our state standardized testing, it's been a lot more eye-opening for students than I've ever seen before, where I have 2 students that speak no English and the test is only in English. So I think it was very eye-opening for students in my class to be like, well, what is Megan gonna do? She doesn't speak any English. Well, she still has to take the test. But what is she going to do? Isn't that going to be like destroying for her? Isn't that going to hurt her? Like, yeah, can you imagine how it would feel to have to take that test? Like, I think there's just a lot more empathy too, where kids are starting to see like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine, and putting themselves in somebody else's shoes. But yeah, I think teachers are just taking some creativity and be like, what can we do that's fun? How can we make this enjoyable?
I'm not a classroom teacher, but I work with some amazing classroom teachers. And I think that collaboration between teachers is a great way to foster creativity. For example, when I was at the middle school in the 8th grade, they were doing a lesson on the Amazon, right? But the instruction after they give the lesson, the kids can choose to present how they want regarding what they learned on Amazon. I had a student wrote a poem. Another student did a painting. Another student wrote an essay, right? Oftentimes, we constrict ourselves to just one way to express our knowledge. So I think in working with collaboration with your colleagues or with other teachers who have able to be creative on how students can show the results in their learning and their knowledge, that's one quick way to be able to still be creative and still meet all the standards, right? And so just working closely with your colleagues to do some of those things. And, we have some amazing educators here in Minnesota. In my district, I see some amazing work and some amazing collaboration. I would never have thought of that, right? And so that's one example that you can also foster some of those creativities as well.
Okay. I'm Peggy Kong, and I'm helping to facilitate the online folks. And Andreen had a question about teachers. So saying, what do you think can be done to attract more persons to the educational profession, considering all the challenges that worsened because of the pandemic? And then on the flip side, we have Nairi, who's asking about recommendations for how we can support families from home.
I can speak to the teacher piece. I have a daughter who started college as a teacher and wanting to be a teacher and has changed her mind. And so I think that teacher preparation needs to start even before college. I think we need to start with the students we're serving and inspire them with positive role models and positive experiences so that they feel inclined to choose teaching as a profession. I think systematically we need to look at teacher pay. I think we need to look at the teacher work day. Ed Week just published a piece about a typical teacher work week being well over 50 hours. I think that's inaccurate. I think it's maybe more than that, given whatever is happening on a certain day or in a certain week in a school. So I think bringing the profession up to a level that is comparable to other professions that require physicality, creativity, a high intellect, and extraordinary people skills would help. I think we need to look at loan forgiveness programs. And I think we need to look at really high quality mentorship programs for new teachers so that when they get into the field, they're supported and they feel as successful as possible. I think we also need to let them know that there is no perfect teacher. And so when they get into the field, we support innovation, we support the fact that they will make mistakes, and we expect that. And then I think another systematic piece that we need to look at, especially I think in the metro area, is class size. I think that class size, just the number of students, especially now that teachers are responsible for, needs some serious consideration. So those are some ideas just off of the top of my head that might help.
Is it on? Oh. Hello, everyone. My name is Heidi Fannin, and I'm actually born in St. Paul, and I'm a recent graduate of the University of Minnesota. So I first wanted to thank you profoundly for being here tonight and sharing your experiences and stories and really rich care for students. So I really, really thank you. My question is, this is the first panel where I'm like, oh, I really want to ask them, what do you need from us? As researchers, because we're here all hoping to improve educational systems in our unique contexts and world, both at like a very micro level, looking at like a certain class, but then also potentially more structural issues. So what research topics, how could we help you through our research?
So that excites me. That's a delicious question there. Thank you for that question. So I think so I read Adam Grant's book as a part of my transition into a new role to work through. I don't want to give a synopsis of the book, but what spoke to me most about what he offered is scientific thinking. And to what extent are the questions that we're asking as educators in the classroom about the desired daily experience of our scholars, of our students, and are the choices we're making, right, in terms of pedagogy, in terms of instructional strategies, are we actually taught in teacher preparation or in leadership preparation to think about how we examine the impact of that choice on student learning? And I don't mean like proficiency, I mean like actually learning, right? Like critical thinking, right? And how does their brilliance get an opportunity to show and express itself based on that strategy? So this notion of I have a hypothesis, right? I want to test out, does creativity as an educator, right, help me make connections for kids that I couldn't make otherwise if I was staying very narrow in my instructional, in my pedagogy. So I think being able to give us, right, action research and to partner with school systems to be able to help them lift up these things that we want to test. For example, disproportionality in behavioral data and the overrepresentation of Black and brown boys in that data. And we're seeing all these evidence-based practices be sold and marketed to urban school districts across the country. With what effect? How is it getting at the root cause? Right? Are we asking the question that actually gets to the root cause? Right? So I think we benefit from thought partnership that's bringing you into our context, bringing you into our spaces with our educators at their collaborative learning teams, their PLCs or professional learning communities, to be able to lift up these questions and to be able to help them, right, develop and cultivate the scientific thinking and testing out the hypothesis of their instruction and their pedagogy. So thank you for that question. That was a really cool, love that question.
I throw one in too. So there is nothing more patronizing in the world than standing in front of a group of teachers and lecturing them about self-care, right? They want to do it and it's really, really hard. So I am all about what are the creative ways that we can design how to do school in a way that takes care of teachers and actually gets at that question. So what are things we can do that doesn't put the onus of self-care on the backs of teachers, but that we can structurally build into schools that just take some of that stress off and help teachers find that joy. So study the self-care. That would be very helpful.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. So Wendy.
Well, it's rather outdated at this point, but thank you. Hi, my name is Wendy, and I am an ESL educator for St. Paul Public Schools at Johnson Senior High, and it's an honor to be here with my colleagues as well. I'm officially a doctoral candidate at this point, I believe, so very excited about that. But Brian, turning back, a few discussions of what has already occurred, your roots are in creativity. You came to St. Paul Public Schools and spearheaded one of the most amazing K-8 schools around creativity. So that's in your soul, your core, and I wanted you to speak to that. So that space that you allowed everyone who entered into that building, including myself, as the ESL program manager for the middle, but every one of us, so the community outside and inside the school that came within the periphery, were invited to be creative and imaginative prior to the pandemic. And so I'm wondering how we can get that back. And as a leader, how could we get that back? That involves everybody. Yes, educators and students and families, but everyone that surrounds that sphere.
Thank you. So thank you, Wendy, for seeing me. It's great to be seen. And I have to acknowledge that I inherited a building with educators who stood on the shoulders of people who had for years been committed to that vision, to that mission. And I was literally like in the space. Nobody had touched me, but I felt hugged as soon as I walked onto the campus, right? Parents were dying to have conversation. Educators, staff were dying to connect with me and to show me what arts integration really looks like, right? And that we're on purpose about that in each and every classroom. And so it unleashed for me, right? Like this desire to partner with folks in a space that allowed us to break the mold, so to speak. And there was, and at that time, 2013 is when I entered St. Paul Public Schools as a principal. And our fearless leader at that time, Valeria Silva, was a part of some very contentious racial equity work that was really pushing hard, really hard. And that was uncomfortable. And you can imagine that invoked all kinds of fear and fragility in folks. So one of the articles that we read at our admin academy to launch the year was on positive deviance. Positive deviance, and this idea that we're deviating from the way that we've done things to try to test to test out what else might have impact. And so I felt like I hit the lottery with the group of adults across both of these campuses. We had a pre-K through 4 site and a grades 5 through 8 upper campus. And there was just this commitment to want to be effective. Like, let's be effective at what we're doing. And yes, the district may have curriculum sequence guides that say we should be on this page in this month, but we were like, no, like if that doesn't work for our kids, we're not doing it, right? So we're going to do what works, and we're going to show you in our PLC data and our grade level data how it's having impact. So I think I don't know if I'm getting at the question, Wendy, but I think there was context, right? There was context there. There were adults who were committed and who were there and were really living out their passion. It was sort of a destination site for educators. And educators brought their children to that site. I mean, there was immense pride. Laura also had her child. There might be her sister out there had her child. Like, so there was immense pride, McAllister faculty. And this was a school that had, over 67% of students qualified for free and reduced. Over a third, English was their second language. And it was an incredible representation of St. Paul Public Schools at large. So I hope I spoke to what you really wanted me to speak to. Thank you.
Laura.
I know we're out of time, but I love this idea of positive deviance. And I just want to say once again, thanks to all of you in the audience online. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks for being educators. We appreciate you as a parent, as a society member, and thanks, Supriya, for having us here tonight.
No, I just wanted to express our deep gratitude for all of you to be here. I mean, for everyone who knows, this is our 4th day at the conference, and this is probably one of the richest conversations we've had since we've been here. And so I think it just reminds us again that as researchers and practitioners, that combination, what we've gone through the last couple of years has been traumatic on so many levels. And thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. Thank you for giving us sort of a bird's eye view of what's happening on the ground, especially in a city like Minneapolis, which is sort of at the center of so much of what we're seeing around the country right now. So thank you for that. Thank you for all for staying, and take care and be well.
Take care, everyone.